The mirror in the boarding house told Josephine Abbott the same truth it had spoken for 23 years. She stood 6 feet and 3 inches tall in her stockinged feet, and that was 5 inches too many for any man in Steins Pass, New Mexico, to even look her direction without wincing. She turned away from her reflection, smoothing down the blue calico dress that barely reached her ankles despite being ordered special from a catalog out of St. Louis. It was March of 1883, and the desert spring brought wildflowers and dust storms in equal measure to this little railroad town huddled against the New Mexico-Arizona border. Josephine had arrived 3 weeks prior, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher, only to find that the previous teacher had been a petite woman of maybe 5 feet, and the schoolhouse desk made Josephine's knees knock against the underside every time she sat down. The children didn't seem to mind her height. Little Sarah Pemberton had declared on the first day that Miss Abbott must be able to see clear to California from up so high, and the other students had laughed without cruelty. But the adults were different. The men looked at their boots when she passed. The women whispered behind their hands, though not unkindly. Poor thing, she had heard Mrs. Henderson say to Mrs. Yates at the general store. Such a pretty face, too. What a waste. Josephine had heard variations of that sentiment since she was 15 years old and had shot past her mother's height, then her father's, then every boy in their Missouri town. She had learned to make herself smaller in every way that didn't involve her actual bones. Quieter voice, hunched shoulders, apologetic smiles. She had learned to expect nothing from men except awkward politeness and quick exits. She was pinning her dark brown hair up when she heard the commotion outside. Steins Pass wasn't a rowdy town, not like some of the mining camps further north, but the railroad brought through all types, and sometimes Saturday nights got loud. This was Sunday morning, though, and the shouting voices carried an edge of genuine alarm. Josephine grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs, her long legs taking the steps 2 at a time. Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house, was already at the door peering out at the street. "What is happening?" Josephine asked, and Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Railroad accident, I think. They are bringing wounded men to the hotel." The hotel had the only space large enough to serve as a makeshift hospital when the need arose, which it did with unfortunate regularity in a railroad town. Josephine didn't hesitate. "I should help." She crossed the dusty street, her height letting her see over the crowd that had gathered. A freight car had derailed about 5 miles east of town, and the crew had brought the injured back in a handcar. There were 4 men laid out on the hotel's dining tables, and Dr. Morrison was already barking orders at anyone who would listen. "I need clean water, I need bandages, I need steady hands," the doctor said, and his eyes landed on Josephine. "Miss Abbott, good. You don't faint at blood, do you?" "No, sir." "Then get over here and help me hold this man's leg steady while I set it." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of blood and pain, and the careful, precise work of keeping men alive. Josephine discovered she was good at this. Her height meant she could lean over the tables without straining her back. Her long fingers were deft at tying bandages. Her steady voice seemed to calm the men when they thrashed or cried out. By noon, all 4 patients were stable, sleeping off the pain or the laudanum or both. "Doctor." Morrison wiped his hands on a towel and gave Josephine a nod of approval. "You did well, Miss Abbott. Ever considered nursing?" "Teachers and nurses aren't so different," Josephine said. "Both involve patience and the ability to stay calm when someone is screaming." The doctor laughed, and Josephine felt something settle in her chest. Usefulness. Purpose. These were better companions than self-pity. She was washing blood from her hands in a basin when the hotel door swung open and another man walked in. Josephine glanced up, then looked again, because this man was different from anyone she had seen in Steins Pass before. He was tall, for one thing. Not as tall as she was, she judged, but well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. He wore dusty brown trousers and a faded blue shirt, and his hat was pushed back to reveal dark hair, and a face that was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all strong jaw and straight nose. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a startling pale blue like winter ice, and when they landed on her, they didn't slide away. "Heard you had injured men," the stranger said, his voice a low drawl. "Came to see if any of them were from the Flying Y Ranch." "None gave that name," Dr. Morrison said. "These are all railroad men." The stranger nodded, then his gaze returned to Josephine. She was still standing by the basin, water dripping from her hands, and she was suddenly, painfully aware that her sleeves were rolled up past her elbows and her hair was coming loose from its pins, and she probably looked like she had been through a cattle stampede. "You help with the doctoring?" The stranger asked her directly. "I helped where I was needed," Josephine said, and she was surprised at how steady her voice came out. "Good of you." He took a step closer, and Josephine braced herself for the moment when he would realize how tall she was, how his eyes would widen, and he would make some excuse to leave. But instead, he just looked at her with those pale blue eyes and smiled. It was a small smile, a little crooked, and it made something flutter in Josephine's chest that she had thought long dead. "Ethan Young," he said, and held out his hand. Josephine dried her hands quickly on her apron and took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, and his hand was large enough that hers didn't feel like she was shaking hands with a child, the way it usually did with men. "Josephine Abbott, the new school teacher." It wasn't a question. "Heard about you." Josephine's stomach sank. Of course he had heard about her. The freakishly tall woman who had to duck under door frames. She withdrew her hand and took a step back, ready for the inevitable awkwardness. But Ethan Young just kept looking at her with that same calm, direct gaze. "Heard you were doing good with the children." "My foreman's daughter, Lucy, says you're the best teacher she ever had." "Oh." Josephine felt heat creep up her neck. "Lucy is a bright student, she is that." Ethan glanced at the injured men, then back at Josephine. "I should let you get back to your work, just wanted to check on things." He settled his hat back on his head and tipped it to her, a gesture so casually polite that it made her throat tight. Then he walked out, his boots thudding on the wooden floor, and Josephine stood there staring after him like a fool. "That is Ethan Young, Mrs. Henderson said from the doorway, her voice carrying that tone women used when imparting important social information. "Owns the Flying Y Ranch west of town. Runs cattle and horses. Lost his father 2 years back and took over the operation. Good man. Fair employer. Not married." The last 2 words hung in the air with the weight of suggestion, and Josephine felt her face grow even hotter. "I am sure that is none of my concern." "Course not," Mrs. Henderson said, but she was smiling in a way that said she thought it should be. Josephine finished helping Dr. Morrison clean up and then walked back to the boarding house in the afternoon heat. The desert sun was relentless even in March, and she was grateful for the shade of her room. She unpinned her hair, changed her dress, and tried not to think about pale blue eyes and a crooked smile. She failed entirely. That evening she wrote a letter to her mother back in Missouri. She described the school, the children, the landscape that was so different from the green hills of home. She did not mention Ethan Young because there was nothing to mention. A man had smiled at her. That was all. It meant nothing. Except she couldn't stop thinking about it. Monday came, and with it the familiar routine of teaching. Josephine loved her students. loved the way their faces lit up when they understood something new, loved even the challenges of keeping 20 children of varying ages and abilities all engaged at once. She taught reading to the youngest ones, geography to the middle group, and mathematics to the older students. Lucy Young was in the oldest group, a thoughtful 12-year-old girl with her father's dark hair and a serious demeanor. "Did your father find what he needed yesterday?" Josephine asked Lucy as the children were leaving for the day, and then immediately regretted it because it sounded like prying. But Lucy just nodded. "He was checking if any of his men were hurt in the railroad accident. They were not, but he said you were very helpful with the injured." "I only did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Lucy said with the blunt honesty of children. "My mother used to say that not everyone has the stomach for blood and suffering. She did. She helped birth calves and set broken bones on the ranch. I think you are like her." It was said matter-of-factly, without particular emotion, but Josephine felt the weight of it. Lucy's mother had died 3 years ago, she had heard, from pneumonia that came on sudden and fierce. Ethan Young had been left to raise his daughter alone while running a ranch, and from what Josephine could tell, he was doing a respectable job of both. "That is kind of you to say," Josephine said quietly. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." Lucy picked up her slate and books. "Father says I am like her too, stubborn and practical." She said it with a hint of pride, and Josephine smiled. Those are good qualities to have. After Lucy left, Josephine tidied the schoolroom and walked back to the boarding house. The days were getting longer, and the evening light painted the desert in shades of gold and amber. Steins Pass wasn't a beautiful town by conventional standards, all dust and rough buildings and the constant presence of the railroad tracks, but there was something about the vastness of the sky and the stark landscape that appealed to Josephine. Here, her height didn't seem so outlandish. Everything was bigger in the west. The distances, the sky, the possibilities, or maybe she was just telling herself stories. Wednesday afternoon brought a visitor to the schoolhouse. Josephine was in the middle of a grammar lesson when she heard a horse outside, and a moment later, Ethan Young appeared in the doorway. He removed his hat immediately, holding it in his hands, and his pale blue eyes scanned the room until they found her. 20 children turned to stare at the tall cowboy in the doorway, and Josephine felt her heart start to pound in a way that was entirely inappropriate for a schoolteacher in the middle of a lesson. "Mr. Young," she said, and was pleased that her voice came out steady. "Is something wrong with Lucy?" "No, madam, Lucy is fine." He looked uncomfortable, his hat brim turning in his hands. "I apologize for interrupting. I was hoping I could speak with you after school is dismissed." "Of course." Josephine was acutely aware of 20 pairs of eyes watching this exchange with great interest. "I will be finished in about an hour. I will wait outside." He nodded to her, then to the class, and retreated. The last hour of the school day passed with excruciating slowness, and Josephine was convinced she made no sense whatsoever in her explanations of proper punctuation. The children were distracted too, whispering among themselves and shooting glances at the door. Even Lucy seemed curious, though she kept her attention on her work. When Josephine finally dismissed the students, they filed out with unusual speed, clearly hoping to witness whatever was about to happen. Josephine took a moment to smooth her hair and steady her breathing before she stepped outside. Ethan was leaning against the schoolhouse wall, his horse tied to the hitching post nearby. He straightened when he saw her, and Josephine was struck again by his height. She had grown so accustomed to looking down at people that it was strange to only have to lift her eyes slightly to meet his gaze. "Miss Abbott," he said, "thank you for your time. What did you need to speak with me about?" Josephine asked, trying to sound professional and not like her heart was attempting to beat its way out of her chest. Ethan cleared his throat. "I wanted to ask if you might come out to the ranch on Saturday, for dinner." Josephine stared at him. "I am sorry, for dinner," he repeated. "Lucy has been asking if you might visit, and I thought it would be good for her to have more time with you outside of school. She does not have many women in her life, and I think she could use that influence." Oh, of course. This was about Lucy, not about her. Josephine told herself firmly that the disappointment she felt was ridiculous. "That is very kind, but I do not want to impose on your Saturday. It would not be an imposition." Ethan met her eyes directly. "I would like you to come, if you are willing." There was something in the way he said it, something in the steadiness of his gaze that made Josephine's breath catch. But she was too experienced in disappointment to read too much into a simple dinner invitation. "Then I would be happy to accept," she said. "Good." Ethan's face relaxed into that crooked smile. "I will come fetch you around 10 in the morning. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I should warn you, I am not much of a rider." "That is all right. I have a gentle mare that would suit you." He paused, then added, "Unless you would prefer the wagon. It is slower but may be more comfortable." The fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice rather than assuming, made something warm bloom in Josephine's chest. "The wagon would be better, I think." "The wagon it is." He settled his hat back on his head. "I will see you Saturday morning, Miss Abbott." "Saturday," Josephine agreed, and watched him mount his horse with easy grace and ride west out of town. That evening, every woman in the boarding house seemed to have heard about the dinner invitation. Mrs. Chen brought extra dessert with Josephine's supper. Mrs. Talbot, who lived in the room next door, offered to help with Josephine's hair. Even young Emma Walsh, who worked at the hotel, stopped by to report that Ethan Young was considered the best catch in the county, and that half the unmarried women within 50 miles had tried to win his attention. "He does not pay them any mind," Emma said with the certainty of a 16-year-old who thought she knew everything about romance. "He is devoted to his daughter and his ranch, but maybe you will be different." "It is just dinner," Josephine said firmly. "He wants me to spend time with Lucy." "If you say so." Emma's expression suggested she did not believe that for a moment. Josephine did not sleep well that night. She kept thinking about Ethan Young's pale blue eyes, the way he had looked at her without flinching, without looking away, without any of the discomfort she had come to expect from men. She told herself not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to heartbreak. But hope, she discovered, was also stubborn and hard to kill. The days between Wednesday and Saturday crawled by. Josephine taught her lessons, helped Mrs. Chen with chores around the boarding house, and tried not to obsess over what she would wear to the ranch. Her wardrobe was limited, practical dresses in dark colors suitable for a schoolteacher. She had one good dress, a deep green wool that her mother had helped her sew before she left Missouri, and she decided that would have to do. Saturday morning arrived with a cloudless sky and the promise of heat later in the day. Josephine dressed carefully, pinned her hair up in a simple style, and tried not to look like she had spent an hour in front of the mirror. She was waiting on the boarding house porch when Ethan arrived with the wagon, pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He climbed down and came to help her up, and Josephine was grateful for his steadying hand as she navigated her long legs and skirts into the wagon seat. He did not comment on her height, did not make any awkward jokes or observations. He simply helped her settle, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "It is a nice morning for a drive," he said as they pulled away from the boarding house. "It is," Josephine agreed, and tried not to be too aware of how close he was sitting, how their shoulders almost touched with the sway of the wagon. They rode west out of Steins Pass, following a rough track that led into the open desert. The landscape was dotted with mesquite and creosote bush, and in the distance, mountains rose like purple shadows against the sky. Ethan pointed out landmarks as they went. A distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed that ran fierce in the summer monsoons, the boundary markers of his ranch. "How long have you been ranching?" Josephine asked, partly because she was curious and partly because talking made it easier not to stare at his profile. "All my life, in one way or another," Ethan said. "My father started the Flying Y when I was 5 years old. We came west from Texas, looking for better grazing land and fewer neighbors. He built the ranch from nothing. When he died, I took over. It is hard work, but good work. Lucy seems very proud of the ranch. She should be. She works as hard as any of the hands when school is not in session." He glanced at Josephine. "She is a good girl. Serious, maybe too serious for 12 years old. I worry sometimes that I do not know how to raise a daughter properly. I know cattle and horses, but girls are a mystery." "I think you are doing well," Josephine said. "Lucy is bright and kind and confident. Those are not easy qualities to foster. Her mother deserves the credit for that. I am just trying not to ruin what Margaret built." There was grief in his voice, old but still present, and Josephine felt a wave of sympathy. "Losing someone you love must be the hardest thing in the world." "It is," Ethan said quietly, "but you keep going. For the ones who are still here, for the life you built together. Margaret would not have wanted me and Lucy to stop living just because she was gone." They rode in silence for a while after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that did not need to be filled with words. Josephine found herself relaxing, her shoulders dropping from their perpetual hunch, her spine straightening. There was something about being next to Ethan that made her feel like her height was not a flaw to be hidden but simply a fact, no more remarkable than the color of her eyes or the shape of her hands. The Flying Y Ranch came into view as they crested a low rise. It was bigger than Josephine had expected, a sprawling complex of buildings clustered around a main house. There were corrals and barns and a bunkhouse, and beyond them, she could see cattle grazing in the distance. The main house was built of adobe and wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides and provided shade from the desert sun. Lucy came running out before the wagon had even stopped, her face lit with excitement. "Miss Abbott, you came." "Of course I came," Josephine said, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. "Thank you for inviting me." Ethan helped her down from the wagon, and Lucy immediately took her hand and began pulling her toward the house. "I want to show you everything. We have new kittens in the barn, and Father let me plant a garden, and I have been practicing my penmanship just like you taught us." "Slow down, Lucy," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "Let Miss Abbott catch her breath." The house was cool and surprisingly tidy for a place occupied by a working rancher and his daughter. The main room had a large fireplace, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books. Josephine noticed immediately and felt a surge of approval. Any house with books was a good house. Lucy gave her a tour, chattering the whole time about the ranch and the animals and her chores. She showed Josephine her room, which was small but cozy, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and drawings pinned to the walls. She showed her the kitchen, where a large woman with gray hair was stirring something that smelled delicious. "This is Mrs. Kowalski," Lucy said. "She does the cooking and keeps house for us. Just call me Anna," the woman said with a thick Polish accent. She looked Josephine up and down with a shrewd eye, then nodded as if coming to some conclusion. "You are the tall teacher. Good. We need more tall women in the world. All these tiny ones, they cannot reach anything useful." Josephine laughed, surprised and delighted. "I have never heard anyone say that before," Then you have been around foolish people. Anna turned back to her cooking. Dinner will be ready in an hour. Go, enjoy the ranch. Lucy dragged Josephine outside to see the barn and the promised kittens, which were indeed adorable. They were in a pile in an empty stall, tiny balls of fluff tumbling over each other while their mother watched with patient eyes. Lucy scooped one up and handed it to Josephine, who cradled the tiny creature carefully. "This one is my favorite," Lucy said. "I named her Boots because of her white feet." "She is beautiful," Josephine said, and meant it. The kitten was purring against her palm, a sound like tiny thunder. They spent the next hour exploring the ranch, with Lucy as their enthusiastic guide and Ethan following behind, answering Josephine's questions about the operation. She learned that the Flying Y ran about 800 head of cattle, plus horses that Ethan bred and trained himself. She learned that they employed 6 ranch hands year-round, plus additional help during roundup and branding season. She learned that water was the most precious resource in the desert, and that Ethan had spent considerable money digging wells and building cisterns to ensure his herd had enough to drink. "You clearly love this work," Josephine observed as they stood by one of the corrals, watching horses graze in the distance. "I do," Ethan said. "It is hard and sometimes frustrating, but there is something satisfying about building something with your own hands, about watching things grow. Every calf born, every horse trained, every year we make it through is proof that we are doing something right." "That is how I feel about teaching," Josephine said. "Every child who learns to read, every mind that opens to new ideas is proof that the work matters." Ethan looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "We are not so different, you and I." "No," Josephine said softly. "I suppose we are not." Dinner was a revelation. Anna had prepared roasted chicken with vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and a pie made from dried apples that tasted like heaven. They ate at a large wooden table in the kitchen, and the conversation flowed easily. Lucy asked Josephine questions about Missouri and what school was like when she was young. Ethan told stories about the ranch, some funny and some touching. Anna interjected with her own observations, her accent thick but her English excellent. Josephine could not remember the last time she had felt so comfortable, so welcomed. No one mentioned her height except to note that she did not have to ask for help reaching the serving platter on the top shelf, which Anna declared a practical advantage. No one made her feel awkward or out of place. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Josephine felt like she fit. After dinner, Lucy begged to show Josephine her horse, a gentle pinto mare named Patches. They walked out to the barn in the golden light of late afternoon, and Lucy demonstrated her riding skills in the corral while Josephine and Ethan watched from the fence. "She is a good rider," Josephine said. "She is. Her mother taught her." Ethan's voice was warm with pride. Margaret believed girls should know how to do everything boys could do. She could rope and ride and shoot as well as any of my hands. She was remarkable. You must miss her very much. Every day. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then added, "But the missing gets easier with time. It does not hurt less, exactly, but you learn to carry it better. And you start to notice the spaces where new things might grow." Josephine looked at him, at the strong lines of his face and the thoughtful expression in those pale blue eyes, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "That is a good way to think of it. I try." He turned to face her fully, leaning one elbow on the fence rail. "Miss Abbott, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you come west? A woman with your education could find work anywhere." Josephine considered her answer carefully. She could give him the easy response, talk about adventure and new opportunities. But there was something in Ethan's gaze that invited honesty, and she found herself wanting to give it to him. "Because I was tired of being a curiosity," she said quietly. "In Missouri, everyone knew me as the girl who was too tall. Too tall to dance with, too tall to court, too tall to be anything but an object of pity or awkward jokes. I wanted to go somewhere no one knew me, somewhere I could just be Josephine Abbott the teacher, not Josephine Abbott the freakishly tall spinster." "You are not freakish," Ethan said, and there was a fierce note in his voice that surprised her. "You are striking. There is a difference." Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness. It is fact." He held her gaze, and Josephine could not look away. "The first time I saw you in the hotel helping Dr. Morrison, I thought you were the most capable-looking woman I had ever seen. Strong and steady and completely unafraid. And then you turned around and I saw your face and I thought you were beautiful too. Your height is part of that beauty, not a flaw to overlook." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Young." "Ethan," he corrected. "Please." "Ethan." His name felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything." But he was still looking at her with those pale blue eyes, and Josephine felt like she might drown in them. "I just wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that I see you, Josephine. All of you, and I think you are extraordinary." Before Josephine could find her voice, Lucy came riding up to the fence, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. "Did you see that last turn? I barely had to use the reins at all. Patches knows what I want before I ask." "You did beautifully," Josephine managed, grateful for the interruption even as part of her wanted to stay frozen in that moment with Ethan, with his words hanging in the air between them like something precious and fragile. The ride back to town as the sun was setting was quieter than the morning journey. Lucy had fallen asleep against Josephine's shoulder, tired from the day's excitement, and Ethan drove the wagon with easy competence through the gathering dusk. The desert was beautiful in the fading light, all long shadows and shades of purple and gold. "Thank you for coming today," Ethan said quietly, careful not to wake his daughter. "It meant a lot to Lucy. It meant a lot to me." "Thank you for inviting me," Josephine said. "I had a wonderful time." "I would like you to come again, if you would want to." "I would want to," Josephine said, and felt brave enough to add, "very much." Ethan's smile was visible even in the dimness. "Good." He helped her down from the wagon when they reached the boarding house, his hands warm and steady on her waist. Lucy woke up enough to hug Josephine goodbye and extract a promise that she would come visit again soon. Then they were gone, the wagon rolling away into the night, and Josephine stood on the porch feeling like something fundamental had shifted in her world. Mrs. Chen was waiting inside with knowing eyes and a cup of tea. "Did you have a good day?" "I did," Josephine said, and could not stop smiling. The next week passed in a pleasant haze. Josephine taught her classes, but her mind kept drifting to the Flying Y Ranch, to pale blue eyes and a crooked smile, to the feeling of being seen and valued for exactly who she was. Lucy seemed happier in school too, more animated, and Josephine suspected the girl was as pleased about the growing connection between her father and her teacher as everyone else in town seemed to be, because the town had definitely noticed. Josephine could not walk down the street without getting knowing looks and questions about her visit to the ranch. The women of Steins Pass, it seemed, were invested in the possibility of romance, and they were not subtle about their interest. "Ethan Young is a good man, Mrs. Henderson told Josephine at church on Sunday. It would be good for him to have a wife again and good for Lucy to have a mother." "We are just friends," Josephine protested, but even she did not believe it. On Wednesday, Ethan came by the schoolhouse again after classes were dismissed. This time, he did not wait outside. He came in and watched as Josephine erased the chalkboard and straightened the desks, and when she finally turned to face him, he was smiling. "I came to invite you riding," he said. "On Saturday. Lucy will be helping Anna with preserving, so it would be just the two of us, if that would be appropriate." Appropriate was probably not the word for it, but Josephine found she did not care. "I told you I am not much of a rider. Then I will teach you. I have a horse that would be perfect for you, gentle and steady, and tall enough that your legs will not drag the ground." The fact that he had thought about her height in practical terms as something to accommodate rather than awkwardly ignore made Josephine's heart squeeze. "All right. Yes. I would like that. Good." Ethan's smile widened. "I will come fetch you at 8 in the morning. Wear something practical." Saturday morning found Josephine dressed in her oldest skirt and a plain shirtwaist, her hair braided down her back instead of pinned up. Ethan arrived exactly at 8, this time riding his own horse and leading another, a tall bay mare with a kind eye. "This is Willow," he said, stroking the mare's neck. "She is patient and smart, and I think you two will get along well." Josephine approached cautiously and held out her hand. Willow snuffled at her palm, then nuzzled against her shoulder in a way that felt like acceptance. "Hello, Willow, please be kind to me." "She will be," Ethan promised. He helped Josephine mount, adjusting the stirrups to accommodate her long legs, showing her how to hold the reins and sit balanced in the saddle. His hands were patient and sure, and Josephine tried to focus on his instructions rather than on how close he was standing, how good he smelled like leather and sage and sunshine. They rode out of town slowly, Ethan keeping pace beside her and offering quiet encouragement. Josephine was stiff at first, nervous about doing something wrong, but Willow was indeed patient, and gradually she began to relax into the rhythm of the horse's gait. "You are a natural," Ethan said after they had been riding for about 20 minutes. "I do not feel like a natural. I feel like I am going to fall off at any moment." "You are not going to fall off. You have good balance. Just trust yourself and trust Willow." They rode out into the open desert, following a trail that wound between mesquite thickets and stands of ocotillo. The morning air was still cool and the sky was an endless blue overhead. Josephine found herself relaxing further, enjoying the sensation of movement, the view from horseback that let her see for miles in every direction. "It is beautiful out here," she said. "It is." Ethan gestured to the landscape around them. "People think the desert is empty, but it is full of life if you know how to look. Everything here is adapted to survive, strong and stubborn and patient. Like you," Josephine teased, feeling brave. "Like all of us who choose to live here," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "It takes a certain kind of person to thrive in a place like this, someone who does not need things to be easy, who can find beauty in harsh places." They rode for another hour, and Ethan showed her things she would have missed on her own. A roadrunner darting through the brush, the tracks of a coyote in the sand, a small spring hidden among rocks where green things grew. He talked about the land, about the cycles of rain and drought, about how the desert taught you to be grateful for small mercies. "You really love it here," Josephine observed. "I do. This land is part of me now. I cannot imagine living anywhere else." He paused, then added, "But it is lonely sometimes. Beautiful, but lonely." There was something in his tone that made Josephine look at him more closely. He was staring out at the horizon, his expression thoughtful and a little sad. "You get lonely?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "Lucy is wonderful company and I have good friends, but there are times when I miss having someone to share things with, someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone who understands what this life means." "I understand loneliness," Josephine said. "I have been lonely most of my life, even when I was surrounded by people. Maybe especially then. Ethan turned to look at her, and the understanding in his eyes made her throat tight. Because of your height. Because I never fit. Because I learned early that I was different in a way that made people uncomfortable, and that no matter how kind they tried to be, I would always be outside of things. Always watching life from a distance. You do not have to be outside anymore, Ethan said. Not here. Not with me. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, and Josephine felt her pulse quicken. Ethan. He urged his horse closer until they were riding side by side, so close their legs almost touched. I know we have not known each other long, Josephine. I know this is fast. But I am too old to pretend I do not feel what I feel. I am drawn to you. I think about you constantly. I want to know everything about you. And when I look at you, all I see is a woman I could very easily fall in love with. Josephine's breath left her in a rush. You do not mean that. I do mean it. His pale blue eyes were steady on hers, certain and clear. I think I started falling the first time I saw you, standing in that hotel with blood on your apron and determination on your face, and every moment since has just made me more sure. But I am. Josephine gestured helplessly at herself. I am too tall. I am awkward. I am not the kind of woman men fall in love with. You are exactly the kind of woman I fall in love with, Ethan said firmly. Strong and smart and capable and kind. And yes, tall, and that is part of what makes you perfect. Do you know how rare it is to be able to look a woman in the eye without her having to crane her neck? Do you know how much I love that I can see your face clearly, that I do not have to bend down to talk to you? Your height is not a flaw, Josephine. It is a gift. Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. I have spent my whole life being told I was too much, too tall, too ungainly, too different. Then everyone who told you that was a fool. Ethan reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. His grip was warm and strong, and Josephine held on like he was an anchor in a storm. You are not too much. You are exactly right, and I would be honored if you would give me a chance to prove that to you. Josephine looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, at the sincerity in his expression. She thought about all the years she had spent making herself smaller, quieter, less. She thought about the loneliness that had been her constant companion, the resignation she had felt when she came west, believing that romance and love were not for women like her. And she thought about how it felt to be with Ethan, how he looked at her with admiration instead of discomfort, how he spoke to her like an equal and valued her opinions, how his daughter had welcomed her into their home without hesitation, how she felt for the first time in her life like she could be fully herself without apology. I would like that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I would like that very much. Ethan's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He squeezed her hand, then reluctantly let go. Good. That is very good. They rode back to town slowly, neither of them in any hurry for the morning to end. They talked about everything and nothing, books they had read, places they had been, dreams they had for the future. Josephine learned that Ethan wanted to expand the horse breeding operation, that he hoped to build a small library in Steins Pass for the community, that he believed education was the key to the territory's future. Ethan learned that Josephine loved poetry and mathematics in equal measure, that she had always wanted to travel but had never had the means, that she dreamed of someday opening a school for girls who had limited opportunities. You could do that here, Ethan said. There are plenty of girls in the territory who would benefit from better education. You could make a real difference. That would require money and space and resources I do not have. But you could have them, with the right support. Josephine looked at him, at the certainty in his face, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. He believed in her. He saw her dreams not as impossible fantasies but as real possibilities. Maybe, she said. Someday. Someday, Ethan agreed. When they reached Steins Pass, Ethan helped her dismount in front of the boarding house, his hands lingering on her waist. They stood close together, and Josephine was acutely aware of everyone watching from windows and doorways, of the gossip this would generate. But she found she did not care. "Can I take you to dinner tomorrow?" Ethan asked. "There is a restaurant in Lordsburg about 15 miles south. It is not fancy, but the food is good and it would give us more time together." "I would like that." "Good." He smiled at her, then did something that made her heart stop. He reached up and touched her cheek, just a brief brush of his fingers, but it sent electricity through her whole body. "Until tomorrow, Josephine." "Until tomorrow," she echoed, and watched him ride away with both horses in tow. Mrs. Chen was waiting inside with tea and an expectant expression, and Josephine ended up telling her everything. It felt good to share her happiness, to put words to the strange and wonderful thing that was growing between her and Ethan. "He is a good man," Mrs. Chen said when Josephine finished. "And he is right about your height. It is not a flaw. My mother used to say that tall women are closer to heaven and therefore wiser." Josephine laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I do not know about wiser, but I am starting to think maybe my height is not the curse I always believed it was." "It never was a curse," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Only other people's small minds made you think so." That night, Josephine lay in bed and let herself hope. She let herself imagine a future that included Ethan and Lucy and the Flying Y Ranch. She let herself picture what it might be like to have a partner, a family, a place where she belonged. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Sunday dinner in Lordsburg became a regular occurrence over the next several weeks. Ethan would ride into town in the early afternoon, and they would make the journey south together, talking the whole way. The restaurant was small and family-run, and the proprietors quickly grew accustomed to the tall couple who came in every Sunday and sat in the corner booth, talking for hours over plates of beef and potatoes and fresh bread. Josephine learned more about Ethan's life, about his childhood in Texas, about the hardships of the early years on the ranch, about his marriage to Margaret, and how they had built something good together despite the difficulties. He spoke of his late wife with love and respect, but without the raw grief that suggested he was still living in the past. "Margaret would have liked you," he said one Sunday as they were finishing their meal. "She always said I needed someone who could challenge me, who would not just go along with whatever I said. You challenge me in the best ways." "I do not mean to be challenging," Josephine said, but she was smiling. "You cannot help it. You have opinions and thoughts and ideas, and you are not afraid to share them. It is one of the things I love about you." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Ethan looked like he was about to say something more, then shook his head slightly and signaled for the check. On the ride back to Steins Pass, he was quieter than usual, and Josephine wondered what he was thinking. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon and then took both her hands in his. "Josephine," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Can you do that?" Her heart was pounding, but she nodded. "I am in love with you," Ethan said, his pale blue eyes locked on hers. "I know it has only been a few weeks, but I am certain. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. You are strong and intelligent and compassionate. You make me laugh. You make Lucy happy. You fit into my life like you were always meant to be there, and when I think about my future, all I can see is you in it." Josephine's breath caught, but Ethan kept going. "I am not asking you to answer me right now. I know this is fast, and I know you might need time to be sure of your own feelings, but I wanted you to know where I stand. I wanted you to know that I am serious about this, about us." And when you are ready, if you ever are ready, I want to marry you. I want you to be my wife and Lucy's mother and my partner in everything. I want to build a life with you." He stopped, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths, and looked at her with an expression of such open vulnerability that Josephine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Can I speak now?" she whispered. "Please." "I love you too," Josephine said, and watched his face transform with joy. "I think I have loved you since the first moment you looked at me and smiled, since the first time you saw me instead of my height. You make me feel like I can be myself without apology. You make me feel beautiful and valued and wanted. And yes, this is fast, but I do not care. I am tired of being careful and protecting my heart. I want to take this risk with you." Ethan made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. Josephine went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck and holding on tight. He was tall enough that she did not have to bend down, tall enough that they fit together perfectly, and it felt like coming home. "So is that a yes?" he asked against her hair. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Josephine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." Ethan pulled back just enough to look at her face, and then he kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Josephine felt like her heart might burst with happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to make you so happy, Josephine. I promise you that." "You already do," she said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning and excitement. Ethan gave Josephine a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and she wore it with pride. Lucy was overjoyed at the news, throwing her arms around Josephine and declaring her the best future mother anyone could ask for. Anna cried happy tears and immediately began planning the wedding feast. The people of Steins Pass reacted with universal approval, pleased that their schoolteacher and the eligible rancher had found each other. They decided on a small wedding in late May, to be held at the Flying Y Ranch. Josephine wrote to her mother in Missouri and received back a letter full of joy and relief. "I have worried about you for so long," her mother wrote. "Worried that you would spend your life alone because of the small-mindedness of others. I am so grateful you found someone who can see what I have always seen, that you are extraordinary just as you are." The weeks before the wedding, Josephine continued teaching, but she also began preparing for her new life. She worked with Lucy to learn the rhythms of the ranch, how to help with the animals and the household tasks. She spent evenings with Ethan, planning their future, talking about how to blend their lives together. He was adamant that she should continue teaching if she wanted to, that he had no expectation she would give up her work just because she was married. "You are an excellent teacher," he said. "The children need you, and I want you to be happy to have your own purpose beyond being my wife." "What if I want both?" Josephine asked. "What if I want to teach and also be a full partner in the ranch?" "Then you will do both," Ethan said simply. "We will figure it out together." The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, warm but not too hot, with a breeze that kept the desert from feeling oppressive. Josephine dressed in a new gown made by the best seamstress in Lordsburg, a simple white dress that fit her tall frame beautifully. Mrs. Chen helped with her hair, pinning it up with small white flowers that Lucy had gathered that morning. "You look like an angel," Mrs. Chen said, her eyes bright with tears. Josephine looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy. She looked confident. She looked like someone who knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The ceremony was held in the yard of the Flying Y, under a bower that Ethan and his ranch hands had constructed from mesquite branches and decorated with wildflowers. The whole town seemed to have turned out, along with friends and neighbors from all over the county. Lucy stood beside Josephine as her bridesmaid, practically glowing with excitement. Ethan stood at the front with the circuit preacher, looking handsome in a new suit, his pale blue eyes fixed on Josephine as she walked toward him. When she reached him and took his hands, Ethan smiled at her with such love that Josephine felt tears threaten. But these were happy tears, joyful tears, and she let them fall freely. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and partnership. He talked about how marriage was a journey, not a destination, and how the best marriages were built on mutual respect and genuine friendship. Then Ethan and Josephine said their vows, promising to honor and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. "I promise to see you," Ethan said, his voice clear and steady. "To really see you, all of you, every day. I promise to be your partner and your friend. I promise to build a life with you that honors both our dreams, and I promise to love you exactly as you are, now and always." Josephine's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to trust you with my heart. I promise to be brave enough to let myself be fully known. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to be your equal and your companion. And I promise to love you with everything I have, for as long as I live." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her in front of everyone, a kiss that was tender and passionate and full of promise. The assembled crowd cheered, and Lucy hugged them both, and Josephine felt like her heart might overflow with happiness. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Anna and several other women had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing. Josephine danced with Ethan, and for the first time in her life, she did not have to worry about being too tall for her partner. They moved together easily, naturally, and Josephine felt beautiful in a way she had never experienced before. "Happy?" Ethan asked as they swayed to a slow song. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Josephine said honestly. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Ethan led Josephine away from the crowd, out to a quiet spot where they could see the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "A wedding present." Josephine unfolded it carefully and found a deed. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading, and then her eyes widened. "This is a land deed, for 20 acres adjoining the ranch. I want you to use it for your girls' school," Ethan said, "when you are ready. We can build whatever you need. Classrooms, dormitories, whatever it takes. Your dream does not have to stay a dream, Josephine. We can make it real." Josephine stared at the paper in her hands, then at her husband's face, and felt love so intense it was almost painful. "Ethan, this is too much." "It is not enough," he said firmly. "You have given me so much. You have brought joy back into my life, given Lucy a mother, made me believe in the future again. This is just the beginning of what I want to give you." Josephine kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love and hope into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, she rested her head on his shoulder and looked up at the stars. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Ethan said, "now and always." They stood there together as the desert night settled around them. Two tall people who had found each other against all odds, who had looked past what the world said was possible, and created something beautiful. Life on the Flying Y quickly became Josephine's new normal. She continued teaching through the end of the school term, riding into town 3 days a week in the wagon. The other days, she helped on the ranch, learning from Ethan and from the hands how to work with the cattle and horses. She discovered she had a knack for breaking the young horses to saddle, her patience and steady demeanor working well with the skittish animals. Lucy blossomed under Josephine's care. The girl had been self-sufficient out of necessity, but she clearly relished having a mother figure again. She and Josephine spent evenings reading together, working on lessons, and talking about everything from mathematics to boys to what Lucy wanted to do with her life. Josephine encouraged Lucy's natural intelligence and independence, and watching the girl grow more confident filled Josephine with a fierce maternal pride she had never expected to feel. Summer came with its intense heat, and the afternoon thunderstorms that turned the dry creek beds into rushing torrents for a few hours before the desert swallowed the water again. Josephine learned to read the sky for weather, to recognize the signs of a storm coming. She learned which plants were edible, which were medicinal, which would make you sick. She learned the names of the birds and the habits of the wildlife. The desert, which had seemed so alien when she first arrived, became familiar and dear. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, she and Ethan would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, their hands linked together. It was a kind of contentment Josephine had never known existed, this quiet, steady happiness that came from building a life with someone you loved. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked one evening as they watched the stars emerge. "How different my life is now from what I expected," Josephine said. "A year ago I thought I would spend my life alone, resigned to being a curiosity. And now I am married to a wonderful man, I have a daughter I love, I have work that matters to me. It feels almost like a dream." "It is not a dream," Ethan said, squeezing her hand. "This is real, this is our life, and it is only going to get better." He was right. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, their life together deepened and grew. Josephine finished her first full year of teaching in Steins Pass with excellent reviews from the school board. Lucy turned 13 and began helping more with the ranch operations, showing a particular aptitude for record-keeping that made Ethan proud. Anna continued to run the household with efficient good cheer, and the ranch hands accepted Josephine as the lady of the house without reservation. In January of 1884, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan in the evening in their bedroom, her hands shaking slightly as she delivered the news. His face went through a series of expressions, shock and joy and a flash of fear, before settling on pure happiness. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "We are," Josephine confirmed. Ethan pulled her into his arms and held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I love you so much," he said. "You have given me everything." "We are in this together," Josephine reminded him. Lucy was thrilled at the news of a sibling and spent the next months reading everything she could find about babies and child rearing, determined to be helpful. Anna fussed over Josephine, insisting she rest more and eat better. Ethan became almost comically protective, trying to stop Josephine from doing anything that might be remotely strenuous. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Josephine told him after he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "I am not going to break. I know," Ethan said, "but you are precious to me. I cannot help wanting to protect you." "Then protect me by treating me like a capable adult," Josephine said gently. "I will ask for help when I need it, I promise, but I need to keep living my life." Ethan agreed, though he never fully stopped hovering. Josephine found it endearing more than annoying. She had spent so long feeling like no one cared what happened to her that having someone worry about her well-being was actually rather nice. The pregnancy progressed well, despite some discomfort as summer approached and the heat became oppressive. Josephine continued teaching until the end of the school term in May, then focused her energy on preparing for the baby. She and Lucy sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Ethan built a beautiful cradle from oak wood. Anna made plans for meals that would be easy to prepare when Josephine was busy with a newborn, In early August, on a night when the heat seemed to shimmer even in the darkness, Josephine went into labor. Ethan rode for the doctor while Anna and Lucy stayed with Josephine, helping her through the contractions. By the time Dr. Morrison arrived, Josephine was well into hard labor, and the next few hours were a blur of pain and effort in Anna's calm, steady instructions. Their son was born just before dawn, as the first light was breaking over the desert. He came into the world with a lusty cry, and when Dr. Morrison placed him in Josephine's arms, she felt her heart crack open with a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered, staring down at the tiny face, the dark hair, the impossibly small fingers. Ethan, who had been allowed back into the room after the birth was complete, sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Josephine, looking at their son with an expression of awe. "He is beautiful, just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Josephine said, and it was true. Even squinting and newborn vague, the baby's eyes were pale blue. They named him Samuel Edward Young, after Ethan's father and Josephine's grandfather. Samuel was long and healthy, and Josephine silently wondered if he would grow up to be as tall as his parents. Lucy was enchanted with her baby brother, holding him with careful reverence and declaring him the best baby ever born. The first months of Samuel's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Josephine learned to function on broken sleep, to nurse while half awake, to read a baby's cries and know what they meant. Ethan helped as much as he could, walking Samuel when he fussed at night, changing diapers without complaint, taking over household tasks so Josephine could rest. Lucy was a surprisingly capable helper, entertaining Samuel when Josephine needed a break and fetching things without being asked. As Samuel grew, Josephine found rhythms that worked. She did not return to full-time teaching, but she did start offering lessons to a small group of girls who wanted more advanced education than the regular school could provide. They met twice a week in the ranch house, and Josephine taught them literature and science and mathematics, preparing them for lives beyond being wives and mothers if they wanted it. "This is the beginning of your school," Ethan said one afternoon, watching Josephine with her students. "This is how it starts." He was right. Word spread about the lessons Josephine was offering, and more girls asked to join. By the time Samuel was a year old, Josephine had 12 students and was already planning how to expand. Ethan kept his promise about the land he had given her, and they began making plans for a proper school building. Life settled into a pattern that was busy but satisfying. The ranch prospered under Ethan's management, the horse breeding operation becoming particularly successful. Lucy grew into a capable young woman, taking on more responsibility and showing signs of her mother's sharp mind and her father's steady determination. Samuel was a happy, healthy child who seemed to be growing taller by the day. On their third wedding anniversary, Ethan took Josephine on a picnic to a spot on the ranch where wildflowers bloomed in a riot of color. They left Samuel with Anna and Lucy and spent the afternoon alone together, talking and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked as they lay on a blanket, watching clouds drift across the sky. "Marrying me, moving to the ranch, giving up the independence you had." Josephine turned to look at him, surprised. "Never, not for a single moment. Why would you ask that?" "Because you gave up a lot. You were a respected teacher with your own life. Now you are a wife and mother first, and I wonder sometimes if that is enough for you." "Ethan." Josephine propped herself up on her elbow so she could see his face properly. "I did not give up anything. I gained everything. Yes, I am a wife and mother, but I am also still a teacher. I am still myself. You never asked me to be less than I am. You encouraged me to be more. I have never felt limited by our marriage. I have only felt freed by it. I am glad, Ethan said, pulling her down for a kiss. Because I cannot imagine my life without you. You are my partner in every sense of the word. And you are mine, Josephine said. The years continued to pass, marked by the seasons of the desert and the milestones of their growing family. When Samuel was 3, Josephine became pregnant again, and this time she delivered twin girls in the spring of 1888. They named them Clara and Catherine, and the girls were as different as could be despite being identical in appearance. Clara was bold and adventurous, always climbing things and getting into mischief. Catherine was quieter and more thoughtful, content to sit and draw or read for hours. Lucy, now 17, was invaluable in helping with the twins. She had grown into a beautiful young woman, tall like her father and stepmother, with a quiet confidence that drew people to her. She had received an offer to attend a teacher's college in California, and after much discussion, Ethan and Josephine encouraged her to go. "You have given me so much," Lucy said to Josephine the night before she left. "You showed me that women can be strong and independent and still have love in their lives. I want to be like you." "You are already better than me," Josephine said, hugging the girl who had become her daughter in every way that mattered. "Go make us proud, and come home when you need to. This will always be your home." Lucy left in the fall, and the house felt emptier without her, but Josephine was proud of the young woman Lucy had become. She wrote often, full of stories about her classes and her friends, and she came home for holidays looking happier and more confident each time. The school Josephine had dreamed of finally became a reality in 1889. With Ethan's support and some funding from wealthy benefactors in the territory, they built a small boarding school on the land Ethan had given Josephine. It had room for 20 girls, with classrooms and dormitories and a small library. Josephine hired 2 other teachers to help her, and they opened the New Mexico Academy for Young Women in September of 1889. The school was everything Josephine had hoped for. They took girls from all over the territory, some from wealthy families but many from working families who wanted their daughters to have opportunities. They taught a rigorous curriculum that prepared the girls for teaching or nursing or business, whatever path they chose. They emphasized that education was not just about finding a husband, but about finding oneself. Ethan was fiercely proud of what Josephine had built. He came to the school often, giving talks about ranch management and business practices, showing the girls that practical knowledge was just as valuable as book learning. He donated horses for the girls to learn to ride, believing that competence in the saddle was an important skill for women in the West. Their own children thrived in this environment. Samuel, who was now 6, was bright and curious, always asking questions about how things worked. The twins, at 2 years old, were handfuls of energy and mischief. Josephine had her hands full balancing teaching, running the school, managing her household, and raising her children, but she had never been happier. One evening in the spring of 1890, Josephine stood on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset. Samuel was playing with a toy horse Ethan had carved for him. The twins were napping inside, finally exhausted after a day of running around. Ethan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How perfect this is," Josephine said. "How grateful I am. 7 years ago I thought I would spend my life alone. I thought I was too different, too tall, too much for anyone to love. And now look at what we have built. A family, a school, a life that matters." "You were never too much," Ethan said. "You were always exactly right. It just took me finding you for you to see it." "You looked up and smiled," Josephine remembered, turning in his arms to face him. "That first day in the hotel, you looked at me, really looked at me and you smiled. That was the moment everything changed." "I smiled because I saw something extraordinary," Ethan said. "And I have spent every day since being grateful that you gave me a chance to prove I was worthy of you." "We are worthy of each other," Josephine corrected. "We are partners, equals." "Yes," Ethan agreed and kissed her softly, "now and always." They stood there together, watching the desert sky turn orange and pink and purple, listening to Samuel's happy chatter and the distant sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Inside, their daughters slept peacefully. At the school down the road, 20 girls were preparing for futures full of possibility. And Josephine, the woman who had once thought she was too tall for any man to love, stood in her husband's arms and knew she was exactly where she belonged. The years that followed were full and rich. Lucy graduated from her teacher's college and returned to New Mexico, taking a position at her stepmother's school and eventually becoming the head mistress when Josephine wanted to step back to focus more on her own children. Samuel grew tall and serious, showing an aptitude for both ranching and academics. The twins remained inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into adventures together. In 1895, when Josephine was 35, she and Ethan welcomed one more child, a daughter they named Margaret after Ethan's first wife. It was Josephine's idea, a way of honoring the woman who had raised Lucy and who had loved Ethan before her. Far from being strange or awkward, it felt right. Margaret had been part of their story, part of what made them who they were. Little Margaret was a happy baby who grew into a sweet-natured child with her mother's height and her father's pale blue eyes. She was the baby of the family, doted on by her older siblings and raised in a household full of love and laughter. The New Mexico Academy for Young Women became known throughout the territory and beyond. Girls came from as far as Texas and Colorado to study there, and Josephine's graduates went on to become teachers, nurses, business owners, and advocates for women's rights. Several went to university back east, a rarity for women at the time. Others returned to their communities and opened schools of their own, spreading the message that women deserved education and opportunity. Ethan's ranch continued to prosper, and he became known as one of the most successful cattlemen in southern New Mexico. He treated his workers fairly, paid good wages, and created a reputation that drew the best hands from all over. He and Josephine were respected members of the community, known for their generosity and their commitment to making the territory a better place. As the 19th century drew to a close, Josephine sometimes looked back on her younger self with compassion and a little sadness. She wished she could tell that lonely, resigned girl in Missouri that her height was not a curse, but a gift, that there was someone out there who would love her exactly as she was. She wished she could tell her that being different was not something to apologize for, but something to celebrate. But she also knew that her earlier struggles had shaped her, had given her empathy and determination, and the ability to see others who felt like outsiders. They had made her into the teacher and advocate she had become, someone who fought for girls who were told they were too much or not enough, someone who believed every person deserved to be seen and valued for who they truly were. On Josephine and Ethan's 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Lucy came with her own children now, 3 little ones who called Josephine and Ethan Grandma and Grandpa. Samuel, now 19 and working the ranch alongside his father, had invited his sweetheart, a smart young woman who reminded Josephine of herself at that age. The twins, 15 years old and full of plans for the future, had decorated the house with flowers. 8-year-old Margaret had written a poem in honor of her parents. The whole community turned out for the celebration, And as Josephine looked around at all the faces of people she loved, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this beautiful, full, meaningful life, was beyond anything she had imagined possible. Ethan found her standing alone for a moment, watching everyone dance and laugh. He took her hand and led her out onto the makeshift dance floor that had been set up in the yard. 20 years, he said as they swayed to the music, and I love you more now than I did the day we married. I love you too, Josephine said. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy, Ethan said with a smile. Thank you for saying yes when I looked up at you that day and dared to hope. They danced under the desert stars, surrounded by family and friends, two tall people who had found each other and built something extraordinary. And as the music played and the celebration continued around them, Josephine sent up a silent prayer of thanks for second chances, for brave choices, for the transformative power of being truly seen and loved. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing changes and challenges but also joys and triumphs. Josephine watched her children grow and thrive, each finding their own path in the world. She continued teaching, though she handed more responsibility to Lucy and her other instructors as the school grew. She and Ethan became grandparents multiple times over, their house often filled with the chaos and laughter of visiting grandchildren. Samuel took over more of the ranch operations as Ethan got older, showing the same steady competence and fairness his father had modeled. He married his sweetheart, a teacher named Rebecca, and they had 4 children of their own. The twins both went to university, Clara becoming a doctor and Catherine a lawyer, both pushing boundaries for women in their chosen fields. Young Margaret followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming a teacher and eventually opening her own school in Arizona. In 1915, Ethan and Josephine celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. They were both in their mid-50s now, their hair showing threads of gray, their faces marked by years of sun and laughter. But they were still tall and strong, still partners in every sense of the word. "Do you remember that first day?" Josephine asked as they sat on their porch, watching yet another desert sunset. "When you came to the hotel and I was helping with the injured railroad men." "I remember," Ethan said. "I walked in and saw you standing there, this tall, capable woman covered in blood and completely calm. And I thought, that is someone extraordinary. That is someone I want to know." "And then you smiled at me," Josephine said softly. "You looked up at me and smiled, and you did not look away. You have no idea what that meant to me, no idea how it changed everything." "I think I do know," Ethan said, taking her hand, "because you changed everything for me too. You brought joy back into my life. You gave me a partner who was my equal. You made me believe in love again. Everything good in my life has come from that moment when I looked up and saw you." "Everything good in my life came from you looking up," Josephine agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. "I love you, Ethan Young. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for however many more we have." "And I love you, Josephine Abbott Young," Ethan said. "My tall, extraordinary, perfect wife. I will love you forever." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Around them, the desert stretched out vast and beautiful, the land that had become their home. Behind them, in the house they had built together, were the memories of 30 years of marriage, of children raised and challenges overcome and love that had only grown deeper with time. And somewhere in the distance, at the school that bore Josephine's vision and Ethan's support, young women were preparing for futures full of possibility, learning that being different was not a weakness but a strength, that they could be exactly who they were meant to be without apology. It was a legacy worth being proud of. It was a life worth celebrating. And it all started with a cowboy who looked up at a woman too tall for any man, or so she thought, and smiled. The desert stars began to emerge one by one, and Ethan and Josephine sat together in comfortable silence, their hands linked, their hearts full. They had built something beautiful from that simple beginning, that moment of connection and recognition. They had proven that love could transcend expectations, that the right person saw past surface differences to the extraordinary person beneath. And as the night settled around them, full of the sounds of the desert and the distant laughter of family inside, Josephine felt a peace so profound it was almost like prayer. She had spent so many years feeling like she did not fit anywhere, like she was too much for the world to accommodate. But she had been wrong. She had not been too much. She had simply been waiting for someone who was enough, someone who could match her, stand beside her, love her exactly as she was. She had found that person in a cowboy with pale blue eyes and a crooked smile, a man who had looked up instead of down, who had seen her height not as a flaw but as part of what made her remarkable. And together, they had built a life that was everything she never dared dream was possible. The end was not an end at all, but a continuation, a promise that the love they had built would echo forward through their children and grandchildren, through the students Josephine had taught, and the lives those students would touch in turn. It was a legacy of being seen, of being valued, of believing that everyone deserved love and respect and the chance to be exactly who they were meant to be. As the night deepened and the stars multiplied overhead, Ethan kissed Josephine's temple and whispered, "Come to bed, my love. Tomorrow will bring new adventures." "Tomorrow always does," Josephine agreed and stood with her husband, ready to face whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together as they always had. They walked into the house hand in hand, two tall people who had found each other against all odds, who had loved each other through 3 decades of joys and sorrows, who would love each other until the end of their days and beyond. And behind them, the desert night was full of stars and possibilities, a testament to the truth that sometimes, against all expectation, the right person looks up and smiles and everything changes forever.